Hi, this is Sweet Life and I'm Natasha, back at it with the review and discussion of Donnie Brasco. Donnie Brasco is a movie that came out in the 90s. Pretty much it's the story of an undercover FBI agent, or an FBI agent who goes undercover in the Italian mob, becoming a member of a faction in Brooklyn where he bears witness to a lot of their illegal dealings, but most importantly, becomes a very close associate of, I want to say, a high-ranking member, but rather within the crew, a high-ranking member within this particular crew, which enables him to learn a lot about the broader business. The agent's name is Joe Pistone, and he works under Lefty. Pistone is able to learn about the inner workings of the mob within this particular outfit. Now, there have been other investigations into the mob and whatnot, other sting operations, undercover informants, but the reason that this particular case, granted it's based on true events, but it's fictionalized for the movie, the reason that it's significant is just how deeply enmeshed and embedded Pistone was able to become within this crew. The insights that he gained were invaluable to the FBI and led to a number of arrests and prosecutions. It was part of this, let's say, attack of the mob that ultimately, if it didn't bring down the mob, drastically changed the manner in which they operate and do business. So this film, it's been a number of years since I've watched it, but I remember the main points of the movie. But in watching it this time around, watching it more closely because I knew I was going to do a review, I came away from it with a different perspective, or rather, different things stood out to me this time around than during previous viewings. The first of which is that in previous viewings, I found myself not necessarily drawn to, but paying closer attention to Joe Pistone character, right? Donnie Brasco, the FBI agent working undercover. He's really the catalyst within the story. He's the main character within the story. He's the one that's like executing this investigation by going undercover. And certainly his character is interesting. But there's been other movies, TV shows, and things like that, especially in the years since, with similar characters. I listen to a lot of true crime podcasts and also watch a lot of documentaries and movies related to true crime or criminal investigations. And so it's like, at this point in time, granted the movie came out in, I believe it was like 98 or something like that. And you've certainly had movies of this nature prior to and in the years since. So an undercover agent isn't really all that out of left field, but what really stood out to me this time around was the Lefty character, portrayed by Al Pacino. Joe Pistone, aka Donnie Brasco, was portrayed by Johnny Depp. But watching this time around, I was actually far more drawn to the Lefty character. The reason being that over the years, there have been a number of, let's say, mob films, or films and TV shows about criminal investigations, criminal enterprises. And one of the things that you tend to notice, or that's often played up, this seemingly glamorous life, right? That they live a life of privilege where, if you think of like your Italian mob movies or even shows like The Sopranos, so much focus and attention is placed on them having all of this money. You know, it's dirty money, but generally they live in nice houses, they wear nice clothes, especially not so much with The Sopranos, but like with some of the more mob movies, they dress in very nice suits. Now, granted, some of the stuff is really tacky, you know, and I think especially with The Sopranos, like, they weren't wearing like very expensive clothes. Maybe their wives and stuff, but they drive nice cars, Cadillacs, which I'm not really into. But for like people like that, those kinds of cars, Cadillacs, Lincolns, like old man luxury vehicles, they drove them. And from the outside looking in, it looks like they're living pretty successful lives. They're doing incredibly terrible things to fund this lifestyle. But it's like the lifestyle is romanticized. And it's not a mob movie, but if you think of like Scarface, time and time again, you hear about rappers, other everyday people who saw that movie when it came out in the 80s and were so mesmerized by this lifestyle. This guy with this rags to riches tale who's like sitting in a bathtub in his living room. He gets the girl and all this kind of stuff. And you listen to people talk about watching that movie and seeing some of these other movies like about mobsters and gangsters and being so mesmerized by the material possessions that these people obtain, really ignoring the violence and the sacrifices and things, the really atrocious things that they do to obtain these material possessions. but they're like mesmerized by the high points of the lifestyle. And for some people, they look at it as just entertainment, which I think most people would and should. But for quite a few, they look at these people, or in the past, they looked at these people and it was like, I want to be like that. Even if you look at like The Sopranos, which was fictional, you have some other shows and movies of that nature where people look at these films, they see these characters, these lifestyles that they're living, and there's something in it that appeals to them. And they begin to emulate some of these things, or they desire some of these things for themselves. I remember watching, I think it was last year, the BMF documentary on Showtime or Stars. And it was actually pretty good. And I remember Big Meech, meaning the dad, not the son, him talking about seeing Scarface and the impact and influence that it had on him and how he chose to model this persona. Watching this movie, it's something that you see in other films, but I think they kind of lean a bit towards the high points of the lifestyle until everything comes crashing down. But pretty much from the outset with Donnie Brasco, when you look at the Lefty character, his life is a mess. There's other movies or other TV shows that lean more into the glamorous aspects of these criminal lifestyles. From the very outset, though, Donnie Brasco leans the other way, showing you the pitfalls and drawbacks that seemingly no one really talks about or focuses on. A few months ago, I was listening to a podcast called Inside the Mob, where it's this guy that was like a DA in one of the federal courts in New York. And I think it was like the first season, it was mostly based in New York. And in the second season, they went somewhere in the Northeast. It wasn't Boston, but like one of those places going further north, like Portland or something like that. Someplace in New England or wherever it was. And in that podcast, I remember one of the guys talking about the reality of being in the mob, where it's like when you watch these movies, they glamorize the lifestyle. Like everybody that's in the mob is just making this world of money. They got all this flashy clothes, expensive jewelry, nice cars, nice house and whatnot. But the reality is a lot of these guys are living hand to mouth. They're out here killing, committing other kinds of crimes, all this criminal activity that's really risking their freedom, in addition to like risking their own lives. But they're really not making that much money. They're living hand to mouth. And it's something that I think this film leans more into. A driving thing behind the Lefty character is this often repeated thing that he's given about 30 years of his life to working within this organization. And he doesn't really have anything to show for it. His life is an absolute mess. He's broke. From the outset, he's constantly like borrowing money from Donnie. The relationship really starts off with him trying to like pawn off this piece of jewelry that Donnie tells him, that he got hustled. This thing of that it's fake and it's not worth anything. And so it's like, you have to wonder, if this guy is in the mob, if you have all of this money, what are you doing messing around trying to sell like this little piece of jewelry? Over the course of the movie, there's this repeated thing. You see these inklings that, number one, Lefty doesn't have any money. He's pretty much living hand to mouth. If you think of like a regular everyday citizen, it'd be like living paycheck to paycheck, where it's like when they pull off a score, when they get some kind of big payday, that's when he has money. But he's broke in the times in between. It's mentioned that like at some point in the past, he had a boat. And it was something that he cherished. It's something that he still thinks about. To get on this boat that he had, or to get a new boat and just sail away from this life, to just leave this life behind. An underlying thing within the story with Lefty is that he really doesn't like this life that he's living, but it's what he knows. It's like, if you think of the concept of sunk costs, where people feel like, I've put all of this time and energy into this thing, into this relationship, into this career, or whatever it might be. For me to walk away now, I feel like I've sacrificed too much. I feel like I can't walk away. And when you look at some of those other movies and they glamorize the lifestyle by just like focusing on the upsides, until, ultimately it all comes crashing down. I feel like this is a more realistic portrayal where you're out here doing all this stuff. I think Lefty mentions that he's killed like 26 people up to the point where he meets Donnie. And this is in addition to committing a number of other crimes. So it's like, should he ever get convicted, he's going to jail for time. He's going to do quite a bit of time, yet he doesn't have anything to show for it. He lives in an apartment with his girlfriend. His son is strung out on drugs. He doesn't have the means to like take the son and send him away to rehab. Here it is that he's devoted his life to this organization. He risks spending the rest of his life in prison, if not being murdered. And yet he's like constantly passed over promotions. He's not really like moving up the ranks or anything like that. And even within that, the people that he associates with, the people that one would think of as being his friends, he can't really trust them. The least little anything happens, him getting called in, it can just as very well be him receiving a promotion as much as it can be him being murdered. It's just this thing of uncertainty where it's really not any kind of life to live. Where some of these other movies might unfortunately attract people to the lifestyle, I think if you watch this movie, it's like it would dissuade people from getting into that life. It provides a more realistic perspective on being involved in the criminal lifestyle. Lefty's life is in shambles. You get the sense that he's looking back over his life. He's looking at his life where it is now. And as part of that is looking back over his life and really just lamenting the decisions that he's made, lamenting the position that he's finding himself in. It's unfortunate. You see that he's incredibly unhappy in his life. The two people in his life, his girlfriend who he loves, he won't marry her because, he doesn't really have anything to give to her. He doesn't have anything to offer her. He mentions earlier in the movie that he lives in the same building as his ex-wife. And it's like pretty much it breaks his heart. It's stressful for him every time they cross paths in the elevator. Like, this man has serious regrets about his life, but it's like he's so deep into this thing that he can't see a way out. And you look at Donnie Brasco, like, I'm sure it's one thing looking at people's lives from the outside, but to see it up close, it's to the point where this guy does terrible things. Lefty, that is. And Donnie gets pulled into his orbit. And, as a result, Joe Pistone gets pulled into his orbit. But the reality is that even he ends up feeling sorry for this guy. Where at one point he turns around and tries to give him money to buy a boat and get out of town. He goes from wanting to bring this guy down to really just feeling sorry for him. Because it's like on the outside looking in, the Lefty character is terrible. He's done terrible things in life. But at the same time, seeing what he's going through, it fits the saying that when people do you wrong, sometimes living well is the best revenge. Because for people that do these terrible things, sometimes them being themselves, them having to live life as themselves is punishment enough. Like, the universe just has a way of taking care of people like that. And it's something that I've personally seen myself, where you're looking at it as you might be trying to do the right things in life, and it seems like things aren't working out for you, or maybe not to the degree that you want. And you look over it and there's people cutting corners doing all of these bad things, and you lament it because you don't have half the things that they have. But you probably also don't have half the stress and drama that they have. You're not living that kind of life. It's like the material things that you gain, the risk that you take to get them, they don't balance out. The things you sacrifice to get them doesn't balance out with what you gain. It's like how many times you look at it where you have like criminals and people that manage to get away with it, right? They live their lives into old age and whatnot. You end up getting killed early. You end up spending a good part of your life in jail, or, you're just in and out of jail. You come out and you're broke. You go back to the street. You get locked up again. And it's just this cycle that repeats. It's like in the short term, you're winning, you're gaining. But it's like in the totality, when you look back over your life, often you would have been better off living a regular life, because it's like the sacrifices that you make just aren't worth it. And paying closer attention to the Donnie Brasco character is he's leading this investigation, but this time around, the interesting story and whatnot was him getting caught up in this lifestyle, the sacrifices that he makes as well. Where if you think of it, it's like the flip side to Lefty, with him being an FBI agent, sure, making this case, helps to bring charges against these guys. That's going to be an incredible career achievement. But you look at it, right? The sacrifices he makes, being undercover for years, having to live a completely different lifestyle than his true character, a different life than Joe Pistone. And the reality is that he misses time with his kids. He misses time with his wife. That's time that he can't get back. These are sacrifices that he's made that he's given up a lot for, right? To make this career achievement. And it's like, sure, you might get some commendations. I think at the end of the film, he gets like a check for $500 and a medal and like some pats on the back. But it's like, was it really worth the sacrifices that you've made? I guess in one sense, you've helped to bring charges against some of these guys and they're now in jail. But it's like, is it really stemming the flow of violence? And I'm not saying that you shouldn't be a police officer or anything like that, or you shouldn't be an FBI agent. But it's like at the end of the day, for both Donnie Brasco and Lefty as well, was it really worth the sacrifices they made for their career? It's like they've given up so much for this. What do you really have to show for it in the end? I do think that your Pistone makes it out like a bit better. He's made some kind of difference. He's done this in pursuit of some good. But it's like, consider the damage that he's done to himself, the damage that he's done to his family, bearing witness, the damage he's done to himself, bearing witness to these various murders, all of this criminal stuff, the people that he's grown to know, to see them murdered in front of his eyes, constantly having to look over his shoulder, just the stress of being in that situation. And then add to it the drama that it brings between him and his wife, with his wife wanting to leave him, wanting to file for divorce. You look at these two characters and it's like, on the surface, it's a story about this FBI investigation. But on a deeper level, it's a story about sacrifice. Two very different careers, but the sacrifices that people make in pursuit of professional achievement, monetary and material gain. And you're looking at it and asking the question of, how much are you willing to do? And is it really worth it? I thought that Al Pacino was a good actor before. He's a pretty good actor. He's had some movies that aren't that great. But in looking at this movie, I think this could possibly be like one of his greatest performances, if not the best. And I would say I'd put this up against his performance even in The Godfather. And if I'm being honest, I would think just the complexity of Lefty. I know The Godfather was probably arguably a bigger film, but I think the performance here that he turns in, I would say it might rival, if not surpass, his portrayal of Michael Corleone. And it's like in the years since, there have been several other Godfather type films, but I think there have been few films with a character that has the nuance and complexity of Lefty. And I think Pacino just plays the role masterfully. Like, if you want to point someone to an example of Al Pacino being an incredible actor, I think you put this movie on and let it play, and they'll be a believer. All in all, you have several great performances from other people that, like the guy that plays Sonny, absolute sociopath. And it's like the tension and whatnot between the different characters, the jealousy and heartbreak that Lefty feels towards Sonny, towards his friends, the tension that's there. It's a very multi-layered and complex movie. It's an incredible story. Great acting all around, a lot of nuance, complexity. I love movies with characters where they have layers and layers to them instead of just all being one thing or another. Because it's like, even with Sonny, it would be easy enough to just have him be like this bloodthirsty lunatic, but there's complexity to him as well. And it's like, just to see the dynamics within the characters, the complexity within the individual characters, and to see the dynamics with them interacting with each other makes for an incredible film, and one that I highly recommend. Thanks for tuning in. To ensure you don't miss any episodes, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and check out my movie review playlist. Go ahead and click the thumbs up button if you like what you saw, and go ahead and share it on social media.